Hello, my lovely anatomists. So we left off last time really looking at the whole muscle anatomy. And what we're looking at with this video is focusing on the anatomy of the muscle fiber. And let's just go ahead and remind ourselves that when we say muscle fiber, we really mean muscle cell. So all the information that we learned in chapter 3 still applies, but of course there's very specialized anatomy, and with that, very specialized terminology that we use when we talk about the muscle fiber. So we mentioned already that it's called a fiber because it's going to be cylindrical. So here, maybe think for yourself of like a paper towel tube or toilet paper tube. That's our cylinder shape, right? And we see that it's also a very long cell. We mentioned already that it can be 30 centimeters in length, which is roughly about 12 inches. And it's pretty thick as well. So it can have a diameter of about 100 micrometers. So that's quite a bit. That's quite a bit for a cell. Now, how did it get to be so big and long? In its development, we have cells called myoblasts. So here we're talking about the fetal development. And the myoblasts, of course, myo is for muscle and blast we know is a builder cell, is going to fuse together to form that future muscle fiber during development. And so then they fuse together to create our muscle fiber. And so another feature that we have on our muscle fibers is that they're multi-nucleated. Multi, of course, means many. Nucleated means nuclei. So we have lots of nuclei. And this is important because this is a cell that's full of proteins, right? And so all the directions to make those proteins would be housed in that nucleus. So this multinucleation is going to speed up protein and that special protein called an enzyme, which is involved in chemical reactions production. When we talk about our muscle fiber, we have all of the same structures that we expect to see in a cell. So we're going to have what we're going to call a sarcolemma. This is our special name for our cell membrane, and I'm going to go ahead and remind us that it's an excitable cell membrane. We mentioned this is a characteristic of all muscle tissue, and the excitable part means that it can generate and propagate an action potential. So just like a neuron can fire, a muscle cell, a muscle fiber can fire as well. We'll see that the sarcolemma has this special feature where it forms what we call transverse tubules. The term tubule just kind of tells us, oh, these are going to be little tubes. And a lot of times what we'll see is this is abbreviated as just a t-tubule. So if the transverse word is a little too much, then you can just say t-tubule. The transverse tubule is going to be sarcolemma. That's extending into the cell. Extensions of, I'm going to say sarcolemma into the cell. So this is going to be important because this means that excitable, that signal, that action potential is not just going to be on the outside, but it's also going to have a method of going down into the middle of the cell. We're going to see our cytoplasm is just referred to as sarcoplasm. So that's going to be just a new name for something we already know about. We're going to have very often lots of mitochondria. Remember, these are going to be our, I'm going to say aerobic respiration for mitochondria, meaning this is going to be making ATP. That's like our super efficient way to make ATP is with oxygen. That's what aerobic means, with oxygen, and that's taking place at the mitochondria. We're also going to have what is called Sarcoplasmic Reticulum. Sarcoplasmic Reticulum. And this is modified smooth ER. ER here stands for endoplasmic reticulum. And its key job is going to be to sequester calcium ions. So sarcoplasmic reticulum can be abbreviated SR. Sarcoplasmic reticulum can be abbreviated SR. This is a modified smooth endoplasmic reticulum, which we talked about in chapter 3. And its job is to sequester calcium ion. And this term sequester, I like to define it as store and hide. So what we'll see is that the sarcoplasmic reticulum will actively, that means requires ATP, actively pump calcium ion out of the sarcoplasm, that's the cytoplasm of the cell, and I'll hold it in the SR. And we're going to see that we have these enlarged portions of the SR called terminal cisternae, would be singular. Terminal cisternae with the AE ending as plural. A cistern holds water. So terminal cisternae, this is actually an enlarged part of the SR. SR, remember, means sarcoplasmic reticulum that holds calcium ion. So when we say the SR is going to sequester that calcium, where does it store it? It stores it in the terminal cisternae. So we'll talk about that. We'll also see that the muscle fiber is full of what are called myofibrils. Myofibrils are going to be containing myofilaments. The myofilaments here we're going to call thin filaments. And we're going to call them thick filaments. So myofibril is composed of myofilaments. These are our contractile proteins. So if you want to maybe make a note here, contractile proteins. These are our contractile proteins. And the myofibril is going to be organized into what are called Sarcomere units. The myofibril then is composed of myofilaments, which are our contractile proteins. We call them the thick and the thin filaments, and they're going to be organized into a unit called a sarcomere. And it's important also to note that this is also going to be cylindrical in shape. So remember, that's like our toilet paper tube. But these are microscopic. These are inside of the cell, right? These are really super duper small. Okay, so let's take a look together at some diagrams from our textbook. So here's a diagram from our OpenStax textbook, and we're looking at the top picture. That is a muscle fiber. So we have the label here of our muscle fiber, which remember we know means muscle cell. Now this whole structure is looking like a cylinder with a bunch of smaller cylinders inside. We can see the nucleus. So remember we have several of these. So we talked about our muscle cell, skeletal muscle cell as being multi-nucleated. And so we can see several of those peppered throughout. We mentioned that the skeletal muscle cell is going to contain mitochondria. That's the plural form of the word mitochondrion. And this is the location for ATP production or ATP synthesis. So we typically see quite a few of those. We see bordered on the outside of the whole muscle cell, the sarcolemma. So this is our special name for our cell membrane. Remember? All of this stuff inside the sarcolemma, between the sarcolemma and the nucleus, remember, is the cytoplasm, or in this case, we call it the sarcoplasm. Now, remember your myofibril, we talked about is composed of your thick filament and your thin filament. We said that these filaments are also collectively called myofilaments. These are our contractile proteins. So your myofibril is a cylindrical shape. It's inside of the cell, so we see a bunch of those. The picture below, we've actually pulled that out. So in the picture below, we're looking at just a single myofibril. So it looks like a cylinder. We see over here shown on this diagram in yellow, our Sarcoplasmic Reticulum. Sarcoplasmic Reticulum, remember, is a modified smooth endoplasmic reticulum, and it's storing or sequestering calcium. And I mentioned already that your myofibril is organized into units called sarcomeres. We're going to do a whole video on sarcomeres, so we'll be able to interpret this picture a little bit better in the future. So we'll see that in the future. Let me go ahead and point out here that in our diagram, I mentioned your myofibril is composed of your thick filament and your thin filament. And this diagram helps us understand that the thick filament is composed primarily of the protein myosin, and the thin filament is composed primarily of the protein actin. This is the next diagram that I want us to look at, shows us highlighting the sarcolemma as the outer cell membrane, right? Sarcolemma is the same as our cell membrane. Now notice we have these small like holes in the sarcolemma. And in our diagram, we can see that that hole is the extension of the cell membrane coming down and then circling around our myofibril. So this is called our t-tubule or transverse tubule. So notice that the t-tubules, I talked about them as going into the middle of the cell. And here we see that they wrap around the myofibril. Notice also wrapping around the myofibril, you have the Sarcoplasmic Reticulum, the SR. And remember, it's going to sequester calcium ion, which remember I said sequester means store and hide. And also remember in an earlier video, we said that calcium regulates, let me see how we phrased it, the interaction between actin and myosin. And then we also said that the actin gets pulled by the myosin during contraction. So clearly this structure of sarcoplasmic reticulum holding this calcium ion is going to be really important as we get into our physiology. Here we have our enlarged chamber of our SR where the calcium is actually located. So the enlarged chamber is called the terminal cisternae. Now notice we have a structure that's listed as triad. Triad means three things. So as we look at this, put it in this color. As we look at this, we see that the triad is composed of terminal cisternae, t-tubule, terminal cisternae. So the three things of the triad are the terminal cisterna, t-tubule, terminal cisterna. So I like to talk about it as like a terminal cisterna t-tubule sandwich. That's it for this video. Stay tuned for an up close, detailed discussion of that sarcomere. And as always, take care of yourselves and each other.